It's November 22nd, 2016. I'm Owen Schroyer. Here's what's on the INFOWARS Nightly News tonight.
Tonight, the New York Post says that President-elect Donald Trump's media summit was an effing firing squad as the mainstream media's top executives and television anchors get scolded by the new president. Meanwhile, the establishment continues to push the new narrative that it was the alt-right fake news on the internet that was responsible for the election of Donald Trump. Then, more threats from North Korea as the U.S. and South Korea conduct joint military drills. North Korean forces say they are ready to launch a preemptive nuclear strike and turn the provocation into a heap of ashes. CNN reports that North Korea is close to having the ability to launch nukes at the U.S. All that plus much more up next on the INFOWARS.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the attacks at us here at Infowars.com, the attacks at you, the Trump supporters, are at full force right now. Of course, we've seen the fake news that's been pushed for the last 2 weeks, and now they're really trying to taint the alt-right by saying that we're racist and all of these other attacks on our character without any proof at all. Now, last night on CNN with Don Lemon, probably the worst host on the mainstream news, and that is saying a lot. Don Lemon wanted to really make the alt-right look bad. He really wanted to smear the alt-right last night on his news program with, of course, David Gergen, one of the other talking heads that they put on there at CNN. We got some highlights from that. We're going to respond to the claims they made against the alt-right and their propaganda. Let's roll the first video.
I want to talk about the alt-right. I want to ask you about this. Members of the alt-right, really a euphemism for white supremacists. I guess it's just their new name now. They've rebranded themselves.
No, you are the ones that branded us that. I don't know where this whole alt-right thing originated. Of course, the thought of the alt-right is that we are of the political right in that thought paradigm, the political left versus right, but we're not the neocons. We're not the establishment right. We're just conservatives that don't go along with the establishment. But somehow they put this term alt-right on us. That's their label. And now Don Lemon is going to use that as a blanket statement for anybody who supports Donald Trump, basically. So if you support Donald Trump, you are the alt-right, and now they have to demonize you and attack you with every character assassination they possibly can. It's just a total blanket statement on anybody who's not establishment conservative without any proof. Now they go on, but let's roll to the next one because this is what they really use to fuel their commentary in this segment. Go ahead and roll this video.
Hail Trump! Hail our people! Hail victory!
So some very strange behavior. You can even see a guy running forward doing the hail, it looks like a Hail Hitler salute. These people are clearly mad, crazed. This is a tiny fringe segment of our society, but they're amplifying it and then making a blanket statement that this is the alt-right. So first they're going to just label us as alt-right, and then they're going to decide that alt-right is racist because they also said that these people are alt-right. This is how the mainstream media twists words, twists information, twists logic, and then tries to character assassinate their opposition without any proof, mind you. Now, let's hear what the Trump administration said in response to these people being affiliated with Donald Trump. Go ahead.
Trump has continued to denounce racism of any kind, and he has was elected because he will be a leader for every American. To think otherwise is a complete misrepresentation of the movement that united Americans from all backgrounds. So my question is that specific enough in this statement? Shouldn't he be very clear what and who he is calling out here?
Of course it's not clear.
Of course it's not clear. I'm David Gergen. How is that not clear? What else could Donald Trump have said? What other statement could have been made that is less clear? We are, hey, whoa, you've got these people over here that seem to be racist. What do you say? we do not support racism of any kind at all. What? I don't understand what he said. It's not clear. It's not clear. I'm David Gergen. What happened? Don Lemon. Oh, my God. So this is how they operate. Trump's statement is not clear when it could not have been more clear. But this is how confused these people are. Let's roll to the next one.
Clearly, Philip, his team and he are not that stupid to believe that this doesn't matter, that they're not trafficking in racism and bigotry by doing this.
Did you hear what Don Lemon just said? Trafficking in racism and bigotry. Don Lemon just said that the Donald Trump campaign is trafficking in racism and bigotry. So I don't know if Don Lemon knows what trafficking means. So somehow, in Don Lemon's weird reality, Donald Trump's campaign is illegally dealing racism and bigotry. Huh. How does that work? Trafficking racism and bigotry, according to Don Lemon. Well, I would make the argument that if anybody is trafficking racism and bigotry, it's you, Don Lemon. You are the one that is trafficking in racism and bigotry. But again, that comment doesn't even make any sense. You just continue to make yourself look like a jackass. I can't even imagine CNN looking at you thinking you're the future of their network. Oh my gosh, of course they are dead. Let's roll to the next one.
Is so weak. This is from a guy who spent months railing against Hillary Clinton for not saying radical Islamic terrorism in that phrase exactly. Can't come out and say, you know, those racist Nazis that were just in D.C., that's not me. Stay away from me. That's not what I'm about.
So now they want to compare Donald Trump not saying neo-Nazi to Hillary Clinton not saying radical Islamic terror. I do not think that the two are on the same platform. If you point to neo-Nazi attacks, it's a very fringe minority amount. If you talk about radical Islamic terror, this is a threat that the entire planet has been victimized by. I mean, you look at what's happened in Europe, you look at what's happened in the United States. So comparing the two is not even close to the same thing. But this is what they do. They'll reach for straws in order to look for anything to character assassinate Trump, to look for anything that might be a double standard against Donald Trump. So if you polled people in America and you said, what are the biggest issues in America? How many of those people do you think would write down neo-Nazi attacks? Not very many. How many people do you think would write down radical Islamic terror? I would guess a large amount of people. So I'm sorry, but that argument saying, well, I won't Trump say neo-Nazis. He demonizes Hillary for not saying radical Islamic terror. He's a hypocrite. Sorry, that argument does not hold water. Let's roll to the next one.
And it may not matter that he is insulting to people of color, Rebecca, considering the number of people of color who actually voted for him, about 7%.
No, you are what doesn't matter, Don Lemon. It's not that Donald Trump doesn't care about people of color. He clearly does. He went and visited those people. He talked to those people. He's won awards for helping the inner cities. But we're beyond the whole what color your skin is. You are actually the ones who are trafficking in race. That is you. That's what you're doing in this segment. But no, you are the one that doesn't matter, okay? And you are discounting all of the people of color that voted for Donald Trump when you sit here and say that it was a white lash or it's white racism that got Donald Trump elected. That is racist. You are the ones trafficking in racism and bigotry, Don Lemon. You need to take a serious look in the mirror and realize that you are a hypocrite and that the only reason why people of color vote for Donald Trump is because you are the one that doesn't matter. Let's roll to the next one.
I listen. I respect what Rebecca said, most of what she said.
David
but
Gergen.
The fact is that
look at Don Lemon's face.
Mr. Bannon represents and has sent out a lot of signals to people as someone you should be scared of, that it's going to go after people in various ways. I have people crying in my classroom. I have people who are, grieving about what's happened, but mostly they're scared. They're scared for their families. They don't know what this means. And I'm sorry, when the alt-right is taken as seriously as it is, and we begin to normalize this conversation to say it's all right to do neo-Nazi kind of rhetoric, and we're just going to accept it. It's just part of who we are as Americans. No, it is not all right.
So it's all right, though, for people to threaten people in the Electoral College if they don't switch their vote to Hillary. It's all right when white people get beaten up in the streets for supporting Trump. It's all right when people talk about assassinating Donald Trump on social media. All that is acceptable for David Gergen. But God forbid that the alt-right exist and have any influence on the narrative. God forbid. But how rich is this? David Gergen is admitting that the students in his class are crying. He just admitted it. They're crying in my class. They're scared. Why? Because of the false narratives that you're feeding them. Why should they be scared of Donald Trump? Why should they be scared of Stephen Bannon? There is no substance there. And again, he's mad about neo-Nazi rhetoric. That's fine. Okay, you can be upset about that. That's well within your right. I think we could all agree that this neo-Nazi rhetoric, we don't need to stand for that. There's no room for that. But where is he calling out the assassination calls against Donald Trump? Where is he talking to all the people on social media who are threatening Donald Trump supporters? That just doesn't exist in David Gergen's world. It's only the alt-right that is racist, that is bigoted, and that is violent. That's David Gergen's reality. And then what happens in his class? His students cry because they didn't get their way, and a racist bigot is now running the country. Aw, let's roll to the next one.
But at the same time, you also don't want to give unnecessary oxygen to some of this hateful rhetoric, and there is the potential to do that.
It's Breitbart that gave them the unnecessary oxygen. Breitbart was the one that helped and gave them the platform. That's what Mr. Bannon said.
Right. I'm talking about these neo-Nazis in Washington.
I love how Rebecca Berg just kind of patted him on the head there at the end like, okay, you know what? You completely missed the point, David, but nice try. I'm glad that you decided to chime in on this one. And of course, the ultimate irony, she's here saying, we don't need to give these people attention. We don't need to give them a platform. This is only making them want to do this more. This is only giving them more firepower. And then David Gergen blames Breitbart for that when he's the CNN pundit on CNN talking about it. This is Don Lemon who is giving them the platform. This is Don Lemon who's putting the spotlight on them, not Breitbart. See, he's missing it altogether. So this is how they work, folks. First, they want to make a blanket statement about any conservative that supports Trump as alt-right. That's how they label us. Then they decide that the alt-right is racist and bigoted. And then at the end, they're going to twist it all together and put a big bow on top of it like a gift and tell you that it's Breitbart that is putting the platform out there for these people to exist. It's Breitbart that is giving them oxygen as they sit there and talk about them for an entire segment, as they sit there and talk about the alt-right all day long, demonizing it. But no, it's Breitbart's fault that the alt-right has a voice, even though that's all they can talk about now. Well, of course we're all that they can talk about. Why would they want to talk about politics? Why would they want to talk about policy? They are losing on those fronts. So here's the deal, folks. You want to know the funny thing about this? David Gergen and all the Trump protesters are in the same boat as Kim Jong-un. How do you like being in a basket with the leader of communist North Korea, who has now wrote Donald Trump a 9-page letter demanding that hostile nuclear threats stop? Cheeky North Korea has sent a 9-page letter to the U.S. demanding it stops the hostile nuclear threats towards the rogue state and its despotic leader. So wait a second. Again, I point out that the Trump protesters and David Gergen and Don Lemon are now in a basket with Kim Jong-un. So if you want to sit here and lump me in with neo-Nazis without any proof, without any substance, just because we perhaps you think we can both agree on the same president of the country, well, you both protest the same president as Kim Jong-un. So I'll just go ahead and throw you in with the North Korean communists then. How about that? How about that, Don Lemon and David Gergen? You guys are on the same page as Kim Jong-un. How does that feel for you? That must be nice. Now, the funny thing about this is, as Kim Jong-un is telling America to stop threatening them with nuclear attacks, it is North Korea who threatens the United States with nuclear attack. And I've got one story here from CNN. North Korea threatens nuclear strike amid new U.S.-South Korea drill. And this is just one story, folks. I've covered multiple stories a handful of times in the last couple of years. North Korea has threatened a nuclear strike against the U.S. But now here they are telling Donald Trump to tone down his rhetoric as far as nuclear striking North Korea goes. But again, I just want to remind David Gergen and Don Lemon, since they love putting us all into baskets and doing identity politics, you're in the same basket as Kim Jong-un if you want to play that game. New UN chief says politicians are failing losers of globalization. So basically the new UN chief, Antonio Guterres, comes in and says, look, the reason why the rise of nationalism is happening is because the people, the citizens of these countries that are going under globalization are losing. They're losing money. They're losing their jobs. Their economy is collapsing, and they don't like these refugee policies. That's collapsing their culture. And so he comes out and he says this. But it's amazing. Still, CNN, still MSNBC, still everybody will come out and say that the rise of nationalism is due to racism. No, folks. The rise of nationalism is due to the losers of globalization. The fact that all of these countries going under the globalized government, the citizens are losing. The citizens are losing power. The government is getting bigger. The government is getting more empowered. And the citizens don't like it. They're the ones losing, and they're waking up to it. And that is what the rise of nationalism can be attributed to. Now Dems are wondering if identity politics did them in. Well, after losing this election to Donald Trump, who was supposed to be the worst man in the world, they should be questioning everything. But no, the truth is, you want to know what did them in, folks? It was nominating Hillary Clinton that did them in. It was the WikiLeaks that did them in. It was all the corruption and the baggage that Hillary Clinton brought with her to the White House, or would have, including Bill Clinton. It was Project Veritas. It was election theft. It was WikiLeaks. Again, it was Hillary Clinton again. Again, you nominated Hillary Clinton. It was Barack Obama going around henpecking, telling people who they need to vote for. That's what did the Democratic Party in. We will be right back with more on the InfoWars Nightly News.
There's been a tragic school bus crash in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We have 6 students still in intensive care. We have another 5 who have died, and there's several more that are hospitalized. Many others have been treated. Now, the question at this moment is whether or not this was deliberate by this individual. And we're going to talk about that, but I also want to look at the parallels to this and a school shooting, because there's indications that this was done deliberately by this individual. And I don't mean to be disrespectful, and I don't want to minimize this tragedy here. We're not mocking anybody. We're simply pointing out the different ways that people react to what may be a mass killing, this time by a school bus instead of by a gun. And I also want to take a look at other tragedies that have been exacerbated by the government. Situations where people have been charged with child endangerment, had CPS come after them, remove their children. Cases where people have been put in jail, charged with homicide because they didn't properly constrain their children. And yet, there are not even any seatbelts in these school buses. Let's take a look quickly at the facts in this case as we know them now. It's still very early. We're told that there are 12 students that have been hospitalized, 6 in critical condition, 5 have died. Another 6 are in stable condition, still in the hospital. 9 children have been treated and released from the hospital. 3 of the students killed were in 4th grade. 1 was in 1st grade. Another was in kindergarten. Now, the man who was the bus driver, his name is Jonathan Walker. He's 24. He's been arrested and charged with 5 counts of vehicular homicide, reckless endangerment, and reckless driving, according to the arrest affidavit. Now, the thing that makes this more interesting from our perspective is that a parent who had 3 children on the school bus, one of whom died, said she was told by her children that the bus driver said before the crash, "Are you all ready to die?" The mother who had 3 children on the bus, including 1 killed, told a reporter with WWJ-TV that the bus driver spoke to the children moments before the collision. The mother says moments before the crash, the bus driver said something to the effect, "Are you all ready to die?" Now, of course, we're going to have video that has been taken from the school bus. There's a camera and recordings. I don't know if it has audio. There's going to be an analysis of this. They're testing him for drugs to see if he has drugs. We also don't have any information on his background. It was a clear day. There were no other vehicles involved. And at the very least, he was speeding excessively. But that comment, if true, as reported by those children, I don't know why they would make that up to the mother, that looks like it may have been a deliberate killing. And so that brings up some questions. What if these children had been killed by a gun instead of by a school bus? I mean, we would have had calls for background checks, even though he may have had a background check. We see that many times there are shootings by individuals who have passed all the background checks, and there was no indication prior to that there were any problems for guns. And yet they say, no, we need to have more background checks for guns. Well, maybe we need to have more background checks for bus drivers. Maybe you can't find all of these cases with a background check, whether it's a gun or whether it is a vehicle. The other thing they'd be calling for is maybe limiting the number of children on a bus. You know, just like they say, we've got to limit the number of bullets in a magazine for a gun. Maybe they should say, we need to limit the number of children on a bus. There were 35 children on this bus. You know, the other thing they might do is they might just call for school buses to be banned altogether. That would be the reaction of some people, wouldn't it? Now, the other thing that is we should look at is how the government has repeatedly exacerbated tragedies when families have been involved. And we all know stories about this. You don't have to look very far to see cases where children of parents who have been involved in an accident, the parents are charged with reckless child endangerment or other charges. They then get CPS to come and take their children away. In many cases, they're jailed. They face heavy fines. And if the children die, they can be charged with homicide. As a matter of fact, we've got a case like that in Chattanooga, Tennessee itself. But first, let's take a look at the child safety advocates pontificating after the fact when children die in an accident, okay? And this is a case here where there wasn't even any children killed. This is Delray Beach, Florida, 2012. They say a day after a couple was arrested on child neglect charges for not having their 5 children properly restrained in their car. A child safety advocate says this is all too common. We need to have more police on the road looking at people. Now, understand, in this particular case, these are 5 children, not 35 children that are unrestrained on a school bus. There are no seatbelts on school buses. They don't do anything to protect the children except pass laws and paint the bus yellow. But that does it for us, doesn't it? Just painting the vehicle yellow. Maybe we should paint all of our vehicles yellow so that none of us have any car accidents, if that works. But look at this particular case, because I think it tells us a lot about this. The person who's a child advocate says children, where if they're in a rear-facing car seat, you know, these kids should be in a rear-facing car seat. There's a 71% safer than a forward-facing car seat, where they're 54% safer. Well, that's fine. Maybe one of the things we could do on school buses is at least turn the seats around. We don't even do that on airplanes, even though you'll be safer in an airplane. In most cases, you can't see where you're going. You'd be safer in an airplane if the seats were around backwards, but the speeds with an airplane are so high that it may not make a difference. It might make a real difference in a school bus, but they don't do anything. There's nothing to protect against whiplash. There's no headrests. There's no seat belts. There's nothing to even pad the buses. They say, nevertheless, they say in this article, regardless of the situation, it's the law. And we see that over and over again. Let's make an example of these people. It's the law. We have to teach them a lesson. And so what they did was they took the parents. They're facing 5 counts each of child neglect for failing to secure their 5 children. And they are being held in jail on a $4,500 and a $3,000 bond, respectively, for these 2 parents. The Department of Children and Families took their children away, ranging in age from 6 months to 5 years old. They put them with their aunt and their parents after being arrested on Thursday. In many cases, after these charges are filed, they will come and you'll get a visit from CPS, depending on CPS and how aggressive they are in your particular jurisdiction. Now, the interesting thing about this as well is that they were not involved in an accident. This was a checkpoint that they had set up. So they were looking for this type of thing and they found it because, you know, it's the law. But let's take an example here in Chattanooga, the same place where this tragedy with a school bus just happened. Let's go back to 1998. Same town. Mother found guilty of homicide for not using a car seat. This woman was Latrice Jones. She was 20 years old at the time. She had her 2-year-old son sitting in her lap. Now, she was in a rental car that was being driven by her sister, who was taking her to a job application. They were struck by a second vehicle that was found to be at fault. That vehicle driver was charged with a misdemeanor. However, the woman driving the car, who was the aunt of the child who died, was charged with homicide, and the mother was charged with homicide because in this rental car, she did not read the warnings about having a child in the front seat, and the child was killed by the airbag. Of course, the airbag is not the problem. The parents are the problem. And think about the fact that right now we have millions of vehicles throughout the world, actually, but just here in the United States, that are under recall for Takata airbags that can go off like a loaded gun and shoot metal shards into people. We've had about 16 people die from that. While they're under recall, while you're waiting to get that changed, you cannot disconnect it. That's the insanity of this government. But in this particular case, she was convicted by a jury of homicide in the same town where we just see this happen. She was sent to jail. She appealed. They rejected her appeal. She had to take it all the way to the Supreme Court in Tennessee, fighting this for 6 years before they overturned the conviction. And we see that happening again and again. The government doubling down, making things worse for people, and then applying a completely different standard for the things that they do, telling us that it is all about safety when reality it's all about the law. It's about the revenue that they can make. It's about controlling our lives. It's about giving them a justification for pulling us over, giving us a ticket, and maybe escalating things if something happens, and that often ends with people being beaten or killed at the roadside. And of course, this woman had to fight for 6 years before she could get out. That is reality. Why can't we have some sanity and some perspective in this? Yes, there are going to be tragedies. And yes, when somebody does something deliberately, we need to hold them responsible for it. And so the question is for you, if you have your child in a government school, do you know who's driving your children back and forth every day to school? Do you know who this person is? Do you trust the government to properly vet them? Do you trust the government to properly vet the teachers so they don't sexually abuse your children, so that they don't teach them to become communists? Not if you turn your children over to the government blindly. For INFOWARS.com, I'm David Knight. Well, yesterday there was another earthquake off the coast of Japan near Fukushima. A lot of people were asking, what the Fukushima? Is this deja vu all over again? Fortunately, it wasn't. Fortunately, it wasn't a major catastrophe like it was 5 years ago. Again, this is a powerful earthquake. It was originally reported as being 7.3 on the Richter scale. They thought they'd have a 10-foot tsunami wave. It turns out that it was downgraded by about a factor of 10, about 6.3, and it turned out to be about 4.5 feet high. So there was no danger, but we did get a scare because we saw the cooling system go down for 90 minutes. Well, this is what happened before. And again, this was the spent fuel pool that's there at the site. So it raises issues yet again about the safety of nuclear power. I don't want to take a look at what the Obama administration has been pushing with nuclear power, what environmentalist groups are pushing about nuclear power, telling us that it is a safe and effective alternative to carbon-based fuel. No, it isn't. Not in the least amount. And the folly of putting these nuclear power plants near earthquake fault lines, as we do in America as well. In California, of course, there's a famous nuclear power plant built on the fault line there in Diablo Canyon. Yeah, the devil's own idea. There's been an update on this recently. The LA Times reports that there's been a landmark deal that has been put together. They believe that it's going to be approved by the California Public Utilities Commission that will shut down Diablo Canyon's 2 reactors in 2024 and 2025, which is the original expiration dates of their federal licenses. Well, that would be interesting because over and over again, we see that the expiration dates that were put on the original licenses that were based on engineering details have been ignored and extended arbitrarily forever. When we look at these situations again, understand that the big part of Fukushima involved spent fuel that was stored on site. We don't really have a plan for storing this fuel. We basically just kick the nuclear can down the road. We put them in big metal containers and we put them in the desert or whatever, but we don't really have a plan for this. The question is, how long are we going to be able to contain this? These things last for thousands of years. What is the cost? And both health risk as well as financial risk to do this. When we look at the cost of nuclear power, nobody is factoring in the cost of nuclear waste disposal, not from a dollar and cent standpoint, not from an environmental standpoint and a human health and safety standpoint. It just simply isn't happening. And the idea that we would put these plants on fault lines, just as they did in Japan, is additional insanity. Take a look at the former NRC chairman who said in the wake of Fukushima that we ought to shut down all these plants. He went around and said, we have a lot of same design issues here in the United States, and we should shut down every single one of these and make safety corrections. Well, he was ignored. he was still talking about it a couple of years later. He talked to the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, IEEE Spectrum. That's their publication. And his name is Gregory Jaczko, I believe is the way you pronounce his last name. He was a former chairman of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They say he didn't mince words in his interview with the IEEE Spectrum. He said the U.S. is turning away from nuclear power, and he expects the rest of the world to eventually do the same. He said, I've never seen a movie set 200 years in the future, and the planet is being powered by fission reactors. That's nobody's vision of the future, he said. This is not a future technology. It's an old technology. It serves a useful purpose, but the purpose is running its course. He said the 104 commercial nuclear reactors in the U.S., he thinks that even those nuclear power stations that receive 20-year license extensions allowing them to operate, he said they're 60 years old. And they may not see out that term. He said the economics of nuclear reactors are increasingly difficult. And that's what we've seen over and over again. Close to where I lived in North Carolina, they built a nuclear power plant in the early 80s. I was some of the people protesting that because I said, you don't have a plan for nuclear waste storage. You don't factor in the cost of nuclear waste storage, as I pointed out, dollar-wise or environmental-wise. And, of course, they didn't. And they're storing that nuclear waste on site. And they're transporting nuclear waste from other places to that site because it's just kind of kicked around like a football, depending on who has the most political clout. It's insanity. And now this nuclear power plant, which had a license initially of 25 years, as it reached that point, they just extended it. No particular reason, even though they had a lot of failing equipment that, for the time being, was relatively minor. They would shut down the nuclear power plant because they would have something bust here or something overload there because of age. The entire power plant has to be shut down and stored. It's not just the fuel. The power plant itself has to be stored for many decades. And he goes on to point out, the former head of the NRC said, 4 reactors are being built. This is in 2013. But he said there's absolutely no money, no desire to finance more plants like that. So in 20 or 30 years, he said, we're going to have very few nuclear power plants in this country. That's just a fact. Well, the facts have never bothered the Obama administration. 2 years later, Bloomberg reported in 2015, new nuclear power seen as a winner in Obama's clean power plan because he's going to shut down all the coal-powered plants and he's going to go against any kind of quote-unquote carbon-based emissions, and they're going to use the EPA as leverage against people and give them credits if they use nuclear power. They're going to incentivize this. He says the Obama administration gave the struggling U.S. nuclear industry a glimmer of hope this week by allowing new reactors to count more toward meeting federal emission limits. States can take more credits for carbon-free electricity to be generated with nuclear power plants under construction as they work to comply with emission reduction strategies targets set by the U.S. EPA. And they then go on to say in the article, well, the question of waste disposal also now hangs over the industry. Yeah, that's the reality that they can't escape, is the disposal of the nuclear waste as well as the safety of the plants themselves. A year later, this year, in June 2016, the Wall Street Journal points out environmental groups are now changing their tune. So remember, 2013, we got the former head of the NRC saying, we've got safety issues with the operation of these plants. They're old technology. We're going to have more problems with this. It is not a long-term solution. It is a short-term safety issue and a long-term storage problem. It doesn't have a future. But then Obama comes in and artificially gives it a future by making it part of the climate shell game. That's precisely what he did. And now he's got the environmentalists joining with him as well. The Wall Street Journal points out some of the nation's most influential environmental groups are softening their long-standing opposition to nuclear power, marking a significant shift in the anti-nuclear movement as environmentalist priorities shift to climate change. See, it's not the plutonium. Don't worry about the plutonium that will kill you in a fraction of a second. No, it's that awful carbon dioxide that is necessary to life on Earth because it's what plants need to have. That has to be expunged, but not the artificially created plutonium that lasts for thousands of years and is incredibly dangerous. No, don't worry about any of that stuff. The change, they say, is lowering one of the biggest political hurdles facing the nuclear power industry in the U.S. It comes at a critical time as several financially struggling reactors are shutting down. So coming to their rescue is this artificial shell game of climate credits and climate taxes, just as we see happening in the car industry. They say because the historical context is that these groups were opposed to nuclear, their absence on the opposition front is noticed, says the president of one of the biggest nuclear power plants in the United States. He says, I think it's pretty significant. I think it's pretty significant as well. And it's idiotic. They say the Sierra Club, country's oldest, largest environmental group, is debating whether to halt its longtime position in support of shuttering all existing nuclear power plants earlier than required by their federal operating licenses. The environmental group's leaders see existing reactors as a bridge to renewable electricity, a bridge to renewable electricity. That would be a bridge to nowhere. See, the problem is not renewable electricity like solar. The problem is the idea that we have to do everything from a central location. So we need to think outside of that box. We need to think outside the box of central power generation. Solar power can work, and these other technologies that are clean can work, but not if they're going to be part of a centralized grid. We need to think out of the box, think outside of the grid, but that's not happening in this administration. Remember, it was just this summer that John Kerry said that air conditioning was a bigger threat than ISIS. He was mocked with an online petition saying, okay, fine, get rid of all the air conditioning in your buildings at the State Department as well as your vehicles. And then he went on to say shortly after that, Syria and Russia's actions, even though, ISIS is not as big a threat as air conditioning, Syria and Russia needs to be called up for war crimes. Well, maybe we'll be calling up air conditioning companies for war crimes. Maybe we'll be calling up Volkswagen for war crimes because they cheated on emission standards. No, they're going to be driven out of business if they continue to make fuel-efficient diesel cars. They got the message. They're going electric. Finally, Kerry has warned of climate threats at the recent talks that we just had, his last song, his swan song. So he was overshadowed, they say, by Donald Trump. That's Reuters reporting that. That's the reality. These people who have given us this insane energy policy, this insane policy towards ISIS, they're going. We're going to have some sanity there. Whether there's going to be sanity in nuclear power policy remains to be seen. For INFOWARS.com, I'm David Knight.
Well, folks, I'm sure by now you have heard about the Kanye West story about how he's now been hospitalized. He said he likes Trump. Obviously, he's married to the Kardashians. There's a whole legacy of Kanye West here that I'll get into a little bit and then obviously talk about the latest. But here in the Mirror, headline, booze, drugs, escorts, and now a breakdown, the frightening curse of the Kardashian men. Well, is this a Kardashian curse or an Illuminati curse? Perhaps it could go either way. Now, here's the whole thing with Kanye West for me. Personally, I grew up listening to some of his hip-hop music, some of his earlier albums I did enjoy. Everything he put out after 808 and Heartbreak kind of just lost me. I didn't really enjoy his music anymore. Then he started to, he was always kind of weird and strange and erratic, but then he kind of went like, it looked like full crazy. Some of the stuff he would wear, some of the stuff he would say, some of the stuff he would do. He became a butt of a lot of jokes. For example, the gay fish joke, if you've seen South Park. And then more recently, he became more politicized, obviously. And of course, he's tied in with the Kardashians, Jay-Z, Beyonce, very Illuminati, if you will, people who follow that type of stuff. But so he's in all of this deep. He's gone crazy, whatever. People like me who liked him growing up now can't stand him. I can't stand how politicized he's gotten. I can't stand how he's become a pawn of the Illuminati. I can't stand how him and Beyonce and Jay-Z and Kim Kardashian all, flaunt around, fopping around all the time like there's some kind of a big deal. But so then he comes out and he says he's going to give Donald Trump a chance. Unlike all the other celebrities that came out and said, well, if Donald Trump wins, we're just going to leave the country, Kanye West said, well, you know what? Yeah, there's some of those celebrities right there that haven't left yet. I wonder if they will leave. I doubt it. They're total frauds. But Kanye West takes the opposite approach and says, you know what? I would have voted for Donald Trump. I think that I'll give him a chance. Then he also apparently says something about people need to check into Pizzagate on Twitter, says something about Jay-Z and Beyonce sending hitmen after him. All this weird stuff. Of course, he talks about the Illuminati. And then all of a sudden, he's in a hospital. He's in a padded room. He's crazy. He's unstable. He needs to be taken in. His tour needs to be canceled. All of this garbage after he comes out in support of Trump. So somehow, all of the crazy, erratic behavior that Kanye West has been exhibiting over the past 5 to 10 years was perfectly fine. But then all of a sudden, when he becomes a Trump supporter, now he needs to be taken in and hospitalized. Now, we're getting all sorts of different reasons for why he was hospitalized. You can just decide for yourself, and it might not even matter. But here's the thing. Now, this is the other angle that I would take here. In this story, it says, Piers Morgan actually suggested, for maybe one of the few times I'll ever agree with that guy, says that Kanye West had been sucked into the vortex of Kardashian reality television. Here's the deal, folks. The Kardashians are they're the Kardashians. They're trash. That's all it is. They're just media garbage. And the sad thing is that young women actually look up to these people. And I mean, look, these women go around flaunting their bodies and whatever, that's your right to do, but do you really want your daughters looking up to them? I mean, are any of these women well educated? I've never heard them say anything smart. They just seem to run around buying things, you know, in their fancy clothes and their fancy cars, marrying whatever man they want to at that given time. And again, this is what young females are looking up to, the most narcissistic, selfish people on television. And they're not even physically real. Beyond the fact that they're totally fake, crying on TV, all that, these marriages, it's all fake. It's all for TV. It's all for money. They're actually physically fake too. Even their bodies and their faces and their nose and their eyes and their eyelashes and their butts, it's all fake. So their entire entity is fake, and then women look up to them. And this is what has corrupted America, folks. When the youth looks up to total frauds, total phonies, total selfish, I think you can decide what I wanted to call these people. This is what you're going to get. But then you go back to the curse. Is this the curse of the Illuminati? Is Kanye West going back and bucking the Illuminati? Or is this the curse of the Kardashian women? Think about it. Kim Kardashian, you had Chris Humphries. That marriage lasted less than what? She decided she wanted to end that marriage before they even got married, I think. Lamar Odom, we saw what happened with him. He ends up in a hospital, just like Kanye West. And let's not forget about Bruce Jenner. Look at what happened to Bruce Jenner. He's not even sure what sex he is now. I'm still not sure. So this is what the Kardashian women do to the men who come into their lives. Imagine what they could be doing to the hearts and minds of young females that look up to them. Now, moving on, a lot of people are talking about how coming up this Thanksgiving, they were either uninvited to their Thanksgiving or they're worried about going to their family Thanksgiving because of their political views. And these stories are now surfacing all over the internet. Here's one out of The Guardian. Family Feud, Election Edition, Americans brace for Thanksgiving discord. Now, here's the thing, and I can only speak for my family, but my family pretty much has discord no matter what at dinner. I mean, you can imagine my family, folks. You know me well enough to know I enjoy a heated debate. I didn't come up with that on my own. But here's the thing. Even if I end up in an intense debate with my family at dinner or after dinner or late night after a couple of friendly beverages, we still get along. We still love each other. They're not going to stop me from coming to their dinner. This is why we love each other. We're okay to have intense debates. We know that at the end of the day, family is the most important thing. And it could go beyond blood. It doesn't have to be blood family. I think you understand what I'm saying. But here's the thing. Just get along with your family over Thanksgiving, folks. The family in this country is being torn apart. This is something that Alex Jones has been talking about for a long time, and we're really starting to see it and feel it now. And this is what the establishment wants. The establishment wants families broken apart. They don't want families to come together over, true, meaningful moments. And whatever you think about Thanksgiving, can't we just come together and all be thankful that we even get the right to vote? Can't we come together and be thankful that we live in a country where we're allowed to have a heated political discussion over dinner? I mean, some countries you do that, you're going to end up taken away. So there's a lot of things for us to be thankful for. And just because we don't get along on policy doesn't mean that we cannot still get along at the dinner table. But here's the thing about it. And here's a story out of the Washington Post. After America's election, there are two Americas now. And so this is the problem. Obviously, because of the polarization of this last presidential election, it really is tough to see the other's perspective, where I'm a Donald Trump supporter. You've heard what the things I've said about Hillary Clinton. How can I possibly think that somebody that would vote for Hillary Clinton has a sound mind? right? So I understand where it's coming from. But nonetheless, we have to put these differences aside and still be able to love one another. But this is what they talk about in the Washington Post when they say two Americas. America divided, waves of protest after Trump's election. And it goes on in this story to talk more about how there's, it actually gets really into detail talking to people. I won't bore you with that detail here. You can go look at it for yourself. It's actually kind of enlightening how people are feuding with their family now going into Thanksgiving because of the results of the election. And again, I would say this. We hear all this talk about Obama's legacy. He wants to shore up his legacy. Everybody pretty much admits now that America is more divided than ever. In fact, we just had polls released on that, and the data says it's the highest ever as far as the polls are concerned. So what is Obama's legacy then? That's my question. Double the debt, more people on food stamps than ever before, and America divided more than ever before. But Barack Obama is going to sit here and talk about shoring up his legacy. The Democrats are going to sit here and campaign for Hillary Clinton saying we need Hillary Clinton to carry on Obama's legacy. Well, what is Obama's legacy? Are you going to admit what Obama's legacy is now? Failed Obamacare? Doubling the debt? Divided America? Because that's what his true legacy is. How about killed police officers? Family of slain San Antonio Police Department officer says Trump called to offer condolences. Nothing from Obama. And you'll notice this other thing too, folks. Do you want to talk about hypocrisy? School shooting, any shooting, a cop shoots a civilian. Any of these circumstances, what do we see? Obama, gun legislation. Democrats, gun legislation. Media, guns are bad. Officers get gunned down in the streets. None of that rhetoric. None of that rhetoric doesn't exist. Now, the guy who killed the cop says that he was doing this because he was angry at the court system and not the police, but I would still suggest that it was the media brainwashing that made him target the police. Thanks for everybody that tuned in tonight. I'm Owen Schroyer. Nightly News will be back tomorrow, 7 o'clock p.m. Central.